Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. So we're here to talk about alcohol and drugs today. I never get that much of an exciting response. Usually I have to kind of coax it out of you, but that's good. I'm happy that you're happy. So I'm here today to ask you to go on a little bit of a journey with me. I want you to think about your perspective or perception. So, Aldous Huxley. Raise your hands if you know who Aldous Huxley is. Very, very prolific author, wrote Brave New World in the 1960s. This man also spent an entire year high on a drug called mescaline. Mescaline is a very powerful hallucinogenic that is found in the peyote cactus of the desert Southwest. It is illegal to possess unless you're part of a Native American tribe, but most Native American tribes don't even use it anymore because it's so powerful and ridiculously hallucinogenic. But he spent the entire year of 1964 high on this drug called mescaline. And he thought that this is how people really ought to see how things really are. He thought that it opened up the doors of perception. It opened up his mind, and he really thought people should be on drugs all the time. He wrote a book about it. He also ended up having a band named after that. Is anybody a fan of Jim Morrison, The Doors? Jim Morrison, The Doors, drugs never went together in the 60s at all, right? So I want you to really think about, that's Aldous Huxley's perspective, right? That's his perception. But what's your perception? What's your perspective? Where do you get your information on alcohol and drugs? Think about that for a second. Is it from personal use? I mean, you're in college, right? So for some of you, you may be drinking underage, even though that's against the law, technically, but that's not necessarily something that may bother you. Some of you may have come to college without drinking alcohol. Many of you probably came to college without ever having done drugs at all, but some of you may have. Some of you may have smoked pot, right? So on this spectrum and this perspective of alcohol and drugs for you, pot's okay for you, but maybe it's not okay for you. Maybe doing a bumper line of Coke is okay with you, but maybe it's not okay with you, and that has nothing to do with your perspective. Some of you may have downed a bottle of Robitussin in high school or junior high to get high off of that wonderful effect that it gives you and the hallucinogenic stimulant, disassociative craziness. But some of you are like, what? I didn't even know that I could do Robitussin to get high. Are you kidding? I'm going to go home and do that right now. So I want you to think about your perspective. Where do you get your information? Is it from siblings? Is it from your parents? Is it from your roommate in the residence hall? Is it from your fraternity sorority brothers or sisters? Is it from your friends, from the neighbor down the street? From the kid down the street that may have actually made the drug that somebody may try Friday night at the party? Is it from the internet? How many of you have ever used the internet for a research paper ever in your college career? Keep your hands up if you can guarantee 100% that that source is valid and reliable. Exactly. Just because it's on the internet does not mean that you can believe everything. So I want you to think about, as we go through the next bit of information, I want you to really think about and challenge what you think you know about alcohol and drugs and question it and compare it to the things that I'm going to share with you, because I'm going to share factual information with you. I'm going to clarify myths and misperceptions. And I'm going to provide real life, real world scenarios so at the end of the day, you walk away with tangible information based in real life so that you're able to make better informed decisions for yourself and for your friends. And at the end of the day, if you learn something new, even better. Fair? Fair. All right. So, we've often heard the term medicated society, right? Over the past year, the top 10 drugs that were prescribed by psychiatrists all deal with anxiety, bipolar, and depression. So, what do all those have in common? What do all those mental, as we call them, disorders, which I hate that term, disorders. There are many terms that I differ with on my health and wellness and counseling colleagues in the world. Binge drinking is one of them, but we'll get to that later. So, what do they have in common? Mood. They're all mood-altering drugs. Mood is just an enduring emotional state. I think, instead of a medicated generation, I believe that we're a medicated society. We're used to altering our mood at the drop of a hat. Some of you take a pill to wake up in the morning, or perhaps it's coffee, right? Some of you take a pill to go to sleep at night. Some of you take supplements throughout the day, or if you work out and you're taking, those are all mood-altering substances. Some of us get a headache, and we take, especially if it's Excedrin or something that has caffeine in it, that's a mood-altering substance. So think about all the mood-altering substances that we take throughout the day, right? All the supplements, all the things that we do throughout the day, throughout the night. I might drink soda, it has caffeine in it. I might smoke, tobacco, nicotine. Those are all mood-altering substances. We don't think about that, and we're bombarded by media messages all day. And sometimes alcohol and drugs are funny. I mean, we lots of things that we laugh about, and there's no problem laughing at alcohol and drugs. But we've become so numb as a society to really think about alcohol and drugs as a problem that when we start talking about the problem of abuse or misuse, that a lot of people just tune out that message. So today I want you to tune it back in. And again, challenge your perception, challenge your perspective. But let's talk about a few terms. And again, this is where I differ with a lot of my colleagues in the counseling world. And from my perspective, I'm a former counselor. I'm no longer a counselor. I'm too directive. I'm too assertive to be a counselor. I would much rather you get to your own answer in the first session than to pay for 10 sessions and sit there and say, all right, what do you... So that's my perspective. So, and I often see things from a different perspective and a different point of view. So let's talk about some terms surrounding abuse and addiction. Tolerance. Tolerance merely means that you need more of a substance to get the same effect than what you used to get on a lesser amount. So, you may have noticed that it used to 1 or 2 beers would get you really buzzed, but then you went home for break over Thanksgiving or the holidays, and it took you 3 or 4 beers to get the same buzz. That's tolerance. That's all that tolerance is. And then withdrawal. We've heard this evil withdrawal term, right? Withdrawal merely means that you have a physical or mental reaction in the absence of that substance. Any coffee drinkers in the room? Drink it in the morning, get a headache mid-afternoon, get a little jittery, but what solves that? More coffee. That's called withdrawal. That's simply withdrawal. Easy, right? So it doesn't always have to be about a heroin injection that we're talking about here, right? Next, abuse. What is substance abuse? Simply put, it is the use of any substance that revolves in that becomes a negative related consequence. That's all that it is. So what's a negative related consequence? A DUI? Sure, DUI. Huge negative related consequence. A hangover? I always do get a smart ass that says, oh no, it's not negative. Listen, you may plan to have a hangover, but my guess is that you don't like it, right? So that's a negative related consequence. So again, there's the spectrum. There's the spectrum of abuse versus addiction. What is addiction? And we can go to the psychological manual and diagnostic statistical manual and all these definitions of everything. 2 words, repeated abuse. That's all that addiction is. So does that mean that if you've had more than one hangover in your life that you're technically addicted to alcohol? Sure, technically, according to the psychologists in our society, absolutely. But does that mean that you have an alcohol problem? Does that mean you've abused it? It's all on a spectrum. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to tell you that drugs are right or wrong or good or bad. I'm just here to give you factual information and challenge what you think you know so that you can take that information back and incorporate it into your life. That's all that addiction is just repeated abuse. And there's a huge spectrum of that. Huge spectrum of that. Prescription drugs. Some people think that they're like candy, right? But really, when we talk about prescription drugs, we're talking about certain classifications of drugs. We've got our opioids. And we have to remember, when I say opioids, it's a real formal thing. Opiates, opium, poppy seed plant. Same drug category as heroin. Heroin, morphine, Oxycontin, Vicodin, your painkillers are all the same drug classification, just a different form. And most people don't know that. That if they're taking Vicodin, if you get a sports injury and you get prescribed Percocet or something, you're taking a different form of heroin. It's exactly what that drug is. And then we have steroids. We also have depressants or antidepressants like Xanax, Valium. And we also have stimulants like Ritalin and Adderall. And what we find is that some college students are taking these drugs to help study aid, and we talk about that throughout the presentation. But one thing that I want to bring up is that almost 80% of college students who report abusing at least one of these drugs, and when I say abusing, I mean you're not prescribed this drug, but you've decided to take it anyway. That is technically considered abuse. Again, there's a spectrum of that, right? almost 80% of those students report that they do polysubstance abuse. So that means that they may be taking Vicodin and Xanax combined, or they're doing some other type of combination. So that's called polysubstance abuse. So let's talk about what happens with consequences very quickly. You're on campus, you're underage, you get caught drinking, what happens? You have to go to the dean's office, you might do a diversion program, right? But you're not going to get kicked out of school if you're 19 years old and you get caught drinking a beer. What happens if you get caught taking or selling or sharing your roommate's Adderall prescription that's not yours? In most states, that's a felony, and in most schools, you'll get kicked out and you won't be able to continue your schooling. You may go to jail, huge amount of fines. So even though the amount of people who are drinking is pretty high compared to the amount of people who are doing drugs, the consequences of that, just in what I shared for you legally and in your future, completely outweigh. And that's why I like to focus on the other drug category. So in order to understand how alcohol and drugs affect your brain, I think you have to understand how we grow up and how your brain develops. So your brain develops from the inside out, almost like layers. Have you ever sliced an onion halfway through and you see all the layers, right? The grooves? So if you think about this, the very first thing when you look at a sonogram, the first thing that you see is baby heartbeat, lungs. Those are your autonomic nervous system. Those are your functions. You don't think about breathing. You don't think about your heartbeat. The next thing are your large motor skills. So the kid just kind of pops out. It's super easy and just starts crawling around because that's how it happens, right? So those are large motor skills as opposed to small motor skills, which are the kid starts picking up a crayon or can actually pick up the sippy cup and can, do that. Now with the large motor skill and the small motor skill, you've seen the difference, right? You've got a baby that's kind of in a crib that's a little, glazed eyed and a little bit drooly, right? Those are your large motor skills. That's exactly what that is. Next, emotions. We've all seen the emotional kids that they don't understand why they're crying. They could be upset, they could be hungry, they could have a really bad mom. We don't know, but they don't know either. And then the next are your concrete fine reasoning. This is why we teach you math at such a young age. 2 + 2 always equals 4. 2 × 2 always equals 4, right? That's concrete fine reasoning. What's the next thing to develop? Sexuality. Puberty. We've all been there. There's your sexual health education for the day. And the final stage of your brain developing is hypothetical or fine reasoning. These are where we take into account things that cannot necessarily be proven, like mathematical proofs, or what happens to me after death. And this is why college students often start challenging their religious convictions that they grew up with. My theory, Gordon's theory, so that's growing up. When you take alcohol and drugs, it affects you in the exact reverse order. It's called growing down. Again, I'm not here to say that alcohol and drugs are right or wrong, good or bad. It's just this is my theory. Watch. Go with me through a typical night of drinking. You have 1 or 2 drinks. What is the first thing everybody says goes first? Your judgment. What did we just say? Judgment, hypothetical reasoning was the last thing, right? So that's why you should never drive, take somebody's keys, those types of things. The next thing to go, sexuality. This is why at 9 o'clock the people who were very unattractive suddenly are attractive at about 1 a.m. and you're probably making out with them, right? After another drink or two, the next thing, concrete fine reasoning. I challenge you the next time you're out for margaritas and chips and salsa, try and add up a tip. 2 × 2 is, what's 20%? It's very difficult. Have another drink or two, and we get the Lindsay Lohan or Britney Spears effect, which is emotions. And we all have that emotional friend that's in the corner freaking out, right? That's exactly what that is. Next that's effect, small motor skills. These are people who just drop their drink, they trip over nothing in the middle of a party, right? I'm fine, we're good. But what's the next thing? Large motor skills. These are the people who are holding up the wall, or they're just asleep in the corner. But what comes next? Your heartbeat, your lungs. This is what we call alcohol poisoning. So we've all heard that crazy term, evil alcohol poisoning. This is it. Your body simply shuts down because it's just had too much alcohol or drugs. And then we can talk about all of the wonderful things that we can do to help prevent to get there. But it's a pretty slippery slope to get from there. And then marijuana. What does marijuana do? Marijuana skips all those steps, right? And it just goes right to the point of large motor skills where you're the baby in the crib with the glazed over eyes and the drool. That's exactly the stage of development that marijuana takes you to in your brain. So there's your alcohol and drug education for the day, folks. Thank you very much.